Matt is one of those people that I was watching before I ever got around to doing this stuff, and this show definitely wouldn't be a thing, if Matt wasn't out there pioneering the field of, doing call-in shows with skeptics on board and stuff. So I gotta say thank you for that, Matt. And
cool. I'm glad.
Yeah.
I didn't start the Atheist experience
Right.
or the call-in idea or anything. I've just been doing it for a long time.
Right.
But, if anything I've said's helped somebody or helped another show start up, cool.
So, and I want to kind of talk to you about that a little bit as we get started here, because I think a lot of people, when they want to interview you, they want to ask you the typical atheist questions and things like that. But I'm kind of more interested on, like, how you've kind of dealt with kind of being a public figure in the movement and stuff. Like, I know when the first time I was getting emails from people saying, like, oh, like, you helped change my mind on something. Like, I thought that was really powerful. And I imagine you get a lot more of those kinds of emails from me. Like, what is that like?
For me, it never stops being powerful. I mean, if I'm running around, it doesn't matter if I'm, speaking on my own to a small local group or if I'm with, somebody else at a 3,000-seat theater. There are people that come up and they talk about how the Atheist Experience show or debates that we did or something else, really had an impact on their life, and that makes it worth it. That makes, because there were people who were warning me early on, because I was the president of the ACA, I was hosting the show, I was a librarian, I did all this other stuff, and they're like, oh, don't do too much, you'll burn out. Well, here we are 14, 15 years later, not burnt out, and I genuinely love doing this. I mean, I went home, I was up at the building yesterday, went home last night, did a debate on the resurrection, got up today, got some other work done. I'm planning on doing a debate review and a couple other videos for the Patreon project, and then it was come up here and do Truth Wanted.
Yeah, like you were kind of going over me with your schedule before the show. You're like, yeah, man, just did the debate yesterday, got to go to American Atheist, then I got to go drive up for this thing and do this and that and that. It's like, man, that's just a lot that you're doing.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of driving in the next month.
Right. Like, it feels like it hasn't slowed down. I mean, like, there's probably hundreds and hundreds of videos of you out there in all these different locations doing these different things. Do you feel like when people meet you, they have like a certain expectation of you based on certain videos and stuff? Do you feel like when people meet you, they kind of have a good sense of who you are, or like?
Yeah. If you've been watching me if you only watched highlight clips from the Atheist Experience, you probably don't have an accurate understanding of who I am.
I think that's
because
fair.
The highlight clips, it'd be like, oh, Matt's going to do a rant, or Matt, makes this Christian look like a fool type thing. And I can't stand that, but that's what kind of gets popular. If you've watched, the various debates and watched full-length shows, you probably know most of who I am, and I'm not all that surprising. It's nice because, when people come up, I don't like any kind of fanboying thing, because I'm not important. Maybe something I've said could be important, but that's the only thing that would be. And I appreciate being appreciated. Who doesn't?
Sure.
But it's funny for me because I'll watch, and there are some people who can't get past the fan. Oh my God, you're here in person, and so the entire day that we're there, I do my thing. But there are other people who figure out really quickly, oh, you're just some jackass that I could have a conversation with and have some fun. And that's how, people end up being friends of mine for ages. It's great to know that you've impacted people's lives, but that should just serve, in my mind, as a motivation to keep doing it, and not a, mission accomplished.
Right.
Rah, 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 look at this.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I remember, I think I was hanging out at your place. We were playing some video games or something, and I messaged in the group chat. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm just playing at Matt's. They're like, you're at Matt Dillahunty's house? It's like, yeah, it's just Matt, man. Like, he's just a friend of mine. Like, that's just kind of how we roll. And I kind of, when I was first kind of meeting people, especially at the ACA and stuff, like, the starstruck thing definitely happened to me a little bit, because it was a personal part of my journey watching these people online and stuff. And then when I started doing my own thing, it's like, okay, now they're just my friends, and we talk about this stuff. And I feel like that's pretty true for most people in kind of like the atheist community and stuff. Maybe not everybody, but most of the people that I've encountered, it's always like, yeah, they're just people and they got their own issues and stuff. And a lot of them, if they have the time, they'll talk to you, and it's just kind of cool. It's just kind of hanging out.
I've had a great time. Obviously the atheist community at large has a number of problems, as any community would. Something's going to go wrong, and it's probably going to involve money or sex or whatever else. But by and large, this community has not only been growing, but has been welcoming. And Conventions were really hot for a while, and then there was I think conventions have kind of waned a little bit in attendance because, well, maybe because we have bigger issues to be concerned about in some things, political stuff, et cetera. But what I find is it doesn't matter what event I go to, whether it's my event, somebody else's event, or a convention, the people who are showing up and coming for the first time and the people who are there for their 97th time all really care about the community. And I know people who will go to conventions. By the way, the American Atheist Convention's coming up in a couple of weeks. I will be there.
Yes.
And
I will not be there, but I believe Eric and Jamie are
Eric
both
and Jamie,
going.
me and Phil,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure who else, but there will be a bunch of us there. I've been to almost every one of them since, Iowa. But I know people who go to conventions. You don't have to do this, but nobody's going to beat you up for doing it. Who don't actually pay and go to the convention proper, but will stay at the hotel because at the hotel bar and in the seating area, there's just tons of conversations going on. And for me, building the community is at least as important, if not more important, than going and listening to lectures and whatever.
Yeah, it's so weird because right before I was getting involved in the atheist community myself, I was part of the Christian community. And I went to Christian conferences as part of my ministry. And just the level of culture difference, the kind of culture shock between going to a Christian conference for mostly like evangelical and then like going to a conference for atheists is like really mind blowing. It's just really funny to see. I think the biggest difference I see is like so many more people are just open to talking about anything. I mean, just anything you think of. And like the craziest conversations come up on the craziest topics. And so many people are so well studied and well versed on the most obscure issues and stuff. Like, hey, you want to know what people believe about flat Earth? Here's a guy who's been studying for like 5 years. Like, hey, you want to know about biblical manuscripts and stuff and how the history of that scholarship is drawn out? Like, here's a guy doing a lecture on this coming up in a few minutes. Like, and when it came to like the Christian community, at least in my experience, and this probably isn't true for other things, but like it's just, it felt like there was kind of, I don't know, I guess a narrative to be pulled out there. Like, oh, hey, even though there's all these different Christian denominations and stuff, we're all part of the same thing and we're all trying to evangelize and we're all trying to do the same thing. And it was never, I never felt like it was an exploration of, well, what about these questions and these questions? Like how do we treat the gay community, for example? I remember that was one I was asking a lot in my Christian communities, and we never talked about that. It was always like an uncomfortable conversation. Whereas here, it's like, oh yeah, let's fucking go. Like, let's do it,
It's an easier answer here because,
that's true.
Hey, how do we treat the gay community? Oh, I don't know, like people
Right.
who are, welcome and everything. It's a much more difficult conversation. Interestingly, at the same time as the American Atheist Convention, Ken Ham and Ray Comfort are going to be putting on a convention that same weekend, just down the road.
Yes.
And I had kind of tried to reach out to them a bit to see if maybe we could work out something where we exchange speakers. Like I go over to their convention and sit there and let the Christians quiz me on things for an hour, and then we get Ken Ham or Ray Comfort to come over.
Yeah.
It didn't happen, but I think it would have been interesting.
I heard that recently on the Scathing Atheist podcast. They were talking about it because the God Awful Movies guys did a review of one of they've done several reviews of Ray Comfort's movies and stuff, and they personally invited them to go to their conference. All they had to do was be on camera and say, I'm an atheist. And I think maybe they're trying to do a thing where they get them on camera again and they say they're not sure after they've seen their evidence they're going to present or something. I don't know, but that'll be interesting.
The real kerfuffle with that is they wrote something about one of Ray's movies where they said this deserves to be taken down. And they were talking about the fact that they were going to lampoon it because they do kind of not quite an MST3K style, but it's, hey, we all watched this movie and now we're going to tell you what happened in the movie and then we're going to talk trash about it. And that's what they meant by taking it down. But Ray, who evidently isn't as hip and cool as I am, wasn't able to figure this out right away and thought that they were calling for his movie to be banned and boycotted and removed from the internet or the interwebs. And so he threw a little fit and sent out a mailer about how these guys were trying to take his stuff down when really they just, he didn't get the joke, I guess.
Yeah, it's
nobody's censoring him.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. Oh man, we could talk about Ray Comfort all day. Ray Comfort, if you're watching, you're more than welcome to call in to Truth Wanted. By the way, I know you're a big fan. And this is a call-in show. We have some open lines. We got the number down there in the corner. Please, if you're watching this live, come on down.
Has Ray called in before?
Ray, not here. Cy10 Bruggencate offered to call in once. I talked to Darth Dawkins on here once.
Oh, boy.
And that's about the extent of the big theist names that I know. That I've called it.
I wish I'd have known, because it's not like Ray and I are good friends and I don't have his phone number, but if I'd have just said, hey, I'm going to be on Truth Wanted on Friday, you want to call in? I bet he would have, and then we could have cleared up this whole thing about Eli and the boys trying to do
cool.
a takedown of his movie.
We should have done that.
But
because I remember I was talking to some people at Baylor campus, and I was talking about some street epistemology stuff, and some people were comparing me. They were saying like, "Oh, what you're doing is the same thing as what Ray Comfort does, in that you're going out on the street and talking to people." And I was just kind of like, "Well, Ray Comfort is trying to convince them that Christianity is true. I'm kind of taking a more neutral stance, and there's kind of some more loaded questions."
I think they misunderstood. I mean, street epistemology isn't evangelizing.
Yeah.
It is a Socratic process of asking questions and getting feedback. And yes, it's a directed approach in which you're trying to get somebody to either lower their confidence level or acknowledge that they've falsely inflated it, stuff like that. But you talk to Magna Bosco and you and others who are actually doing this. At no point have I come across a street epistemologist who's like, my job is to go out and ask people questions specifically so that they give up their religion and become an atheist. That's not the goal.
And if you watch street epistemology channels, like the topics of conversations are super, super broad. I'd say generally it tends to go towards the religious conversations. I think those are the more interesting conversations, in my opinion. But you're willing to talk about anything. I was watching Reed Nicewonder, who runs Courts of Curiosity, who was like talking about gender with people, like what people's concepts of gender was. And Reed's a liberal guy. I'm sure he thinks the same way that you and I do about gender, but he wants to be skeptical anyway and kind of talk to people and be like, okay, well, what's your concept of gender, so that we can kind of break that down and be a little bit more open about it and have conversations with people on topics that they normally wouldn't feel comfortable talking about, which is just really fun sometimes too.
It reminds me of a long conversation. I had a 6-hour conversation with my mom around Christmas, and I already talked about the birthday card I got on the last Atheist experience right after I got it. But one of the things that she sent back was, okay, you've closed a door, so don't ask us any more questions about our Bible.
Yeah.
And I think that the point that she missed is when I ask her questions about her Bible, I'm not doing it so that she can educate me, because we all already know, and they would already admit, that I know the book better than they do in every respect. I'm asking the questions in a Socratic sense so that they'll get to recognize that, hey, there are problems here.
Yeah.
And she just didn't get that. She was like, well, don't be asking us any more questions about our Bible. And I'm like, okay.
Right. The first time I talked with my parents about all this and I kind of came out to them and stuff, I was like, hey, ask me anything. I want you to figure out where I've been, what's my journey's been and stuff. And they were so hesitant, they didn't even want to talk about it. And I got the impression of maybe they felt like I knew more than them at that point, and they felt like they couldn't convince me otherwise, or maybe they just felt like, maybe they framed it like, I've swallowed this kind of narrative, and now they can't really, bring me out of it, which I don't think is true. But
my folks didn't want to talk about it early on, anyways. As a matter of fact, when I first talked to my dad on the phone, he said he was going to think about it, and he hung up. And it turns out what they did was they hopped in the car and they went and found an event where Lee Strobel was lecturing, because Lee won't debate. And so they went to him and they're like, hey, our son is an atheist. What do we do? And what Lee did was he sold them copies of his books, the Case for Christ, the Case for the Resurrection, et cetera. And then they gave these to me at Christmas. And I said, thanks, Mom, but I already have these books. As a matter of fact, I've already written a rebuttal to this one. If you want to get me apologist books, just ask me which ones I don't have, because I don't need 10 copies of Evidence That Demands a Verdict or Josh McDowell's, Case for Christ, et cetera. And a couple of years ago, I did a debate here in Austin against Mike Licona, and Lee Strobel was there. And so I got to go up to Lee, have him autograph the copy of the book that my mom had given me.
Oh, wow.
Tell him this story, and then look him dead in the eye and say, perhaps the next time parents come to you and ask you what they should do about their atheist children, your response, instead of selling them books, should be, talk to your children.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people are just afraid to have these conversations. I think people are afraid of being wrong because if, Christianity is true, at least most mainstream forms of it, there's going to be consequences to not having the belief. And so, there's kind of an incentive not to doubt. There's an incentive not to have some of these conversations because, you're already on, the right side of things. Why bother removing that and risking the potential of going to hell? And that's a real threat for people sometimes.
Plus, over the years, it's become clear to me in much the same way that I didn't know all that much about my religion while I was believing it.
Yes.
Most people don't.
Yeah.
And most people don't ever bother to study this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's you grow up in it or you are either indoctrinated as a child or you become convinced, at some point, and you're active in your church. And what religion becomes to these people is this is something I believe, it's part of my identity, but I don't have to know any more about it because what I really get out of it is this community with all of these other people. And it would be seemingly absurd to think that all of us are wrong about this, so we just don't even bother to think about it or investigate. And when they come across people who have done that legwork, it's, well, we're just, we're not going to deal with that.
Right.
And there's this 3-stage, mind thing that goes on, which is the first time you hear something, it's just weird and you disregard it. And then the second time you hear something, it's, I think I've heard something like that before, but you still disregard it. And when you get to the third one, now you've hit a pattern. And so this works on an individual basis, which, anybody who's doing street epistemology is if they were to talk to the same person over and over again, or if you're on this show or Talk Heathen or something where you might get repeat calls, you can watch someone go through these things where now it's maybe a little less weird and they'll start to open up for conversation. But my thing that I love is there was I think it was a Pew Study poll that came out just a few weeks ago showing that if you break down religious denominations, atheists are now at 21, or non-religious at 21.3%. And what that means is the entire Western world is largely made up of people who've not only heard this the first time and the second time, but are now going to be here from the third time. They've now met 3 people who don't believe what they believe. And as soon as we get to the point where everybody knows and has had some interaction with 3 or more secular individuals, I think it's going to fundamentally change the nature of the conversation. And once we realize, we've known for ages that the non-religious portion of the United States population is vastly larger than the Jewish population here. And yet you've got the Anti-Defamation League and you've got pro-Jewish lobby and you have this this religious sentiment of some kind of shared identity and protection from Jerusalem. It's going to get to the point where reaching out to the secular community is going to be recognizably more viable than reaching out to the Jewish community when it comes to politics and things like that.
Yeah, that's so true. Gosh, I saw that same statistic and I was blown away because all the previous ones I've ever read, they seem to be much smaller, less than 10% and stuff like that. And I don't know.
The study cheated a little bit.
Yeah, okay. So
it's because they divided it up into Catholics and several different types of Protestants. And so that makes atheists, now they're all at about 20%. So it puts us on even footing. But if you just took all the Protestants and put them together and separated them from Catholics, they would be a larger group. And if you put Protestants and Catholics together, you're still talking about 60 to 70% of the population.
Yeah. I didn't look into the methodology. I was very curious about that because it's wow, that's a bigger number than what I was used to seeing. And studying atheism as a social phenomenon is notoriously very difficult because you're working with different definitions and not all people who may believe the same thing are using the same words to kind of describe their beliefs and stuff.
And this wasn't 21% atheist. It was 21% with no religion.
Right, which is going to give you, slightly different results depending on how you view that.
I know. I used to joke. I don't know what your language restrictions on the show are, so I'm pacing myself.
Whatever you want.
It was funny to me because there was this notion within Christian culture that it is the atheists that are corrupting things, the godless people, the people who are not, religious. And I was like, yes, as if we're the only ones who are indulging in pornography. Not that there's anything wrong with porn. I love porn. But it's not only atheists who are doing this. And the proof of that is go watch some pornography and see how many of the young women in there are wearing cross necklaces while they're butt naked and getting boned. It's ridiculous. And, it's like the old joke that Catholics don't recognize Baptists are going to heaven, and Baptists don't recognize each other in the liquor store, and Methodists don't recognize each other at the strip club.
Right.
It's funny to me because we know that this is just human behavior. It's not like atheists have cornered the market on any particular religious sin. The religious still outnumber.
Yeah.
And I think that people are starting to wake up to this. Now, the study, I didn't like the way they put the graphs together because, first of all, it's non-religious. And I know plenty of people who believe in a God or maybe culturally Christian, et cetera, who, when polled, would say, no, I don't have any religion. There's an additional problem with that in that there is a contingent of Christians who don't want to label their religion a religion. Oh, I'm not part of a religion. I have a personal relationship with the risen Christ.
Yes.
And so if they were asked what their religion is, they would say no religion, even though they're actually Christian.
That's interesting because I always heard that rhetoric growing up, but I never took it to the logical extreme that some people did. Like, they actually don't think they don't have a religion, which is, it's just...
They're wrong.
I just don't know how you come to that conclusion, honestly, besides... it's a talking point.
They are wrong under every measure.
Yeah.
And even under like Supreme Court rulings, as a secular humanist, I would have to say that in a legal sense, I have a religion because secular humanism was given the exact same protection as a religion, and not in the same sense that you have freedom of religion, including freedom not to believe something. Secular humanism was specifically written in as a protected religion. I don't necessarily know that I agree with that because, but certainly secular humanism has a manifesto and tenets and things like that that atheism on its own doesn't have.
Actually, next week we're planning on having Bart Campolo come talk on and talk about secular humanism. So if you're interested in that conversation, I know I am.